Closing arguments today in a trial full of shocking evidence for 4 men charged with creating a plot to kidnap Michigan's governor. A federal prosecutor is pointing to evidence including training exercises, mapping out the governor's house, and discussion of blowing up a bridge to slow a police response, with the ultimate goal of sparking a civil war.
The surprises we've had to deal with over the last few years have been something out of fiction.
It was 6 months of meetings, online messages, training exercises across multiple states, and surveillance by the FBI before 6 men were arrested and charged with conspiracy to commit kidnapping in October of 2020. The prosecution argues the men were anti-government extremists, filled with rage over COVID-19 restrictions imposed by the Michigan governor, and wanted to create chaos leading up to the 2020 election. Court documents show agents arrested the men after discussions of raising $4,000 for an explosive that could blow up a bridge and slow down a police response to a kidnapping at Governor Gretchen Whitmer's vacation home in northern Michigan. Evidence also shows the militia constructed a shoot house to replicate Whitmer's home and practiced going in and out with guns. But the group was being closely watched by undercover federal agents and informants, including one named in court documents who helped spark the initial investigation. Big Dan Chappelle, an Army veteran, testified that he joined the Wolverine Watchman militia to maintain his firearm skills, but was alarmed when he heard discussions about attacking police. Hired as an FBI informant, Chappelle provided key evidence in the federal government's case, including audio recordings and messages showing the men wanted to tie up and kidnap the governor, blow up a bridge, and then take her to Wisconsin to put her on trial.
These are not the actions of, stable people. This is a depraved situation. It is incredibly violent. It is incredibly serious.
2 of the men, Ty Garbin and Caleb Franks, ultimately pleaded guilty, agreeing to testify against the other 4. But defense attorneys for Brandon Caserta, Barry Croft, Adam Fox, and Daniel Harris say the 4 men were just big talkers and never meant what they said. At the heart of their case, Stephen Robison, a career criminal who worked as an FBI informant, but is now accused by the agency of working both sides. According to court documents, Robison helped set up meetings, coordinate and pay for training exercises, and was with the men when they conducted surveillance on the governor's Elk Rapids vacation house. During the trial, the defense argued Robison persuaded their clients into doing something they would not have otherwise done.
They're claiming, obviously, entrapment, that you helped entrap them.
Well, I guess we'll see how that pans out.
But you didn't?
No, I did not.
Okay. I mean, they acted on their own.
They certainly were grown up and made their own decisions on anything that happened.
Jury deliberations on the fate of these 4 men begin Monday. If convicted, they could face up to life in prison. Michael Zweiback previously served as an Assistant U.S. Attorney in California, where he worked on cyber-related crime and terrorism. He's joining us live tonight to break down this case. Thanks for being here. This evidence appears pretty damning, right? It's recorded phone calls, messages, dry runs, militia ties. But what do you make of the defense argument that they were baited into it by undercover agents and this informant?
Well, the defense is doing what they need to do in order to try to set up an entrapment defense, which is the legal phrase for what they're attempting to demonstrate to the jury, which is this is a lot of talk. It's a lot of very inflammatory language, but they would not have committed the crime, the argument goes, without the government giving them the opportunity and basically stoking the fire of their own political views to take the next steps towards the completion of the crime.
And the one suspect, or the one defendant who testified in his own defense, said he considered this informant to be the leader of the group. Do you think that argument will hold with the jury?
It is a very difficult uphill battle for the defense, given the statements that they have. And basically the prosecutor in his closing argument did exactly what he needed to do, which is play the statements of the individuals and demonstrate the actions that they took in furtherance of this agreement to get to the next step, which was ultimately to kidnap the governor.
And then prosecutors in this trial, which is just kind of a circus, they showed Hawaiian shirts, they showed these weapons, the body armor. Are they criminalizing the First and Second Amendments?
Well, that's the argument that the defense is making, that this is talk, even inflammatory talk, is protected by the First Amendment. What's not protected by the First Amendment is an agreement amongst individuals to take actions, and in this case, there were many, many actions that went beyond simply inflammatory talk that expressed their political views. And so the government has a much easier time, given the mountain of evidence that they have of demonstrating that. The defense, on the other hand, must show that these were otherwise ordinary law-abiding citizens that were simply given an opportunity that was essentially created by the government. That is a very difficult burden on the defense.
And how do they prove, though? How does the prosecution prove that this wasn't just talk? I mean, when does rhetoric cross the line into criminal conspiracy?
It's the actions that they have to focus on. I've tried many cases where I've faced an entrapment defense, and what you must focus on is what acts were taken by the defendants, separate and apart from their own speech, which may be repugnant to most people, but it really focuses upon what they did as opposed to necessarily what they said.
And all of these men had ties to fringe right groups, right? These militia groups. Does this domestic terrorism case tell us anything about what's actually happening under the surface in America right now? Or do you think this is an outlier?
Well, I think that there's a lot of, there's significant indication that these groups are gaining in terms of their membership. I think it's still relatively small, but given what we're seeing in this particular case in terms of the extreme nature of the actions that they're willing to take against the political system, it is obviously very concerning and something that the FBI should be involved in investigating. So
you don't think that the jury will buy that the defendants are being painted by the defense as these unsophisticated misfits who had unpopular views and were easily baited by the government?
I think the issue of predisposition is always a very difficult one in entrapment cases. And what that means is that they have to show that these people were otherwise law-abiding. And I think that even though they may be the gang that couldn't shoot straight and in many ways incapable of ultimately carrying out the actual kidnapping of the governor, the fact that they took the actions they took demonstrates the actual nature of the crime. And that's all the government has to prove.
All right, Michael Zweiback, thank you for your analysis. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching. Click the red subscribe button below so you can get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.